On today's DNVR Broncos podcast, we're looking at George Paton's tenure as the Broncos general manager, looking at the highs, looking at the lows, and talking about should he be extended. And that conversation starts now. Back, and so is the DNVR Broncos podcast. And will George Paton be back? Maybe Ryan will show up for this show as Yahir just exposes him for being a minute late. He's going to join us shortly, live in the Toyota Lounge, driven by your local Front Range Toyota stores. We are the DNVR Broncos podcast, and we are Ryan Koenigsberg, who's coming in right now, Henry Chisholm, Zach Stevens, and Yahir and Dion behind the mic. Wow, just going right in front of the camera.
Where else would he go?
F's, huh? Around?
Oh.
What do you mean, where else would he go?
I feel like you gotta make an entrance, you know?
Yeah, you already like ratted me out.
No,
for being
I
late.
didn't. I was going to keep it cool, but
I would have said something.
Yahir opened up with just the 3-man set picture, and so I was like, "Wow, Yahir exposed Ryan for not being here." I was going to let you just walk in.
It was a premeditated lateness.
Okay.
You know, like I told you guys I was gonna be late.
Yes.
Yeah, and I told you hear that, and he still exposed you.
It's crazy.
It was a
I feel like it's the right thing to do. That you have to embrace it, you know?
Totally.
We don't need to be keeping secrets from people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then I like it. The hair's looking nice and fresh.
Thank you.
Very fresh. Did you do the beard too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Always.
Looking sharp. And
Everyone on YouTube can tell. There we go.
Exactly. There you go. How you doing, fellas?
I'm doing great.
Good.
3 straight days of great weather,
Yep.
according to the forecast.
Yep.
That's all I can ask for.
Yep. Exactly. 70s, almost 80s later on this week.
The best.
It is. I need to start wearing the shorts.
Yeah.
It's
It's shorts
shorts
weather.
and t-shirt weather. You got it going on.
Oh yeah, of course.
And guys, we're going to talk about George Paton today, and boy, let's look at this. Let's go through his entire tenure, break down the moves that have happened in free agency, the draft, coaching, trades, everything, and go through, because I think it's going to be quite a curvy road that we take when talking about him, and get to where we are today with him, and then talk about his future with this team moving forward. And so let's just start. Let's go all the way back. And so when I say go all the way back, Henry, where does that get us with George Paton?
Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett.
Oh, no,
that.
way before that. That was a year after he was
That
hired.
was a year in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the Vaughn trade, I guess.
No, keep
Was that
going. Keep
even
going.
before?
Back it up. We were starting at the beginning of George Paton.
Fangio.
Yep.
Fangio was there. Mm-hmm. And the Broncos won 7
I
games.
guess I'll take us all the way back. This is
How many games did
the
they
very
win?
start of the George Paton era was, I think, before he was hired. You go back to what happened. John Elway, the sports legend in Colorado, steps down. I believe it was the day after the season ended, after the 2020 season, and it was, I think, at like 4:30 on that Monday. And John Elway, see the tweet from Adam Schefter. John Elway is stepping not down, but stepping up and kind of moving up in the Broncos organization. And then we quickly find out, we have a Zoom with him later that day, and we quickly find out that what this means is that the Broncos are looking for a new general manager. And this is a way for John Elway to step away from the day-to-day with still having a little bit of a role in the organization. The further we got down the line, the more we found out that he just really wasn't that involved, and that was okay. It was just his way. Instead of, firing himself, he stepped up in the role, and the Broncos needed a new general manager, and I think that's where the George Paton era starts, because he's replacing the legend in Colorado sports.
Yeah.
And at that time, though, people kind of turned on John and didn't like how the past 5 years after Super Bowl 50 went. And the name that popped up immediately to replace him was George Paton. And the reason for that is George Paton was one of, if not the hottest general manager candidates in the entire NFL for a couple of years now, even to the extent where he turned down the Cleveland Browns wanting to give him second and third interviews and said, no, I'm just waiting for the right opportunity. So when George Paton's name popped up, at least from my memory, that was like
The guy.
The guy. Yep. And if the Broncos could land, it wasn't necessarily about will George get the job. It was, is this a good enough opportunity for the Broncos to convince George to come here? And they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about the fan base kind of turning on John Elway. But at the same time, the next Super Bowl the Broncos win without John Elway's involvement will be the first.
That's crazy.
And so it was still massive shoes to fill.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's how it was viewed. They got the deal closed at Elway's, I believe. Of course, John took him to Elway's, got the deal closed in Cherry Creek. I'm not sure if that's when Vic was eating the hamburger or if that was during Vic's own hiring process. Yeah. But the Broncos get that deal closed. And the interesting dynamic about this back then was Vic Fangio was sitting in on these interviews and was part of the hiring process. And so people thought, man, maybe this is really good news for Vic. And then, Henry, we get to that first season where one of the first moves that George Paton makes, one of the biggest moves, I should say, is the Broncos go on to trade for Teddy Bridgewater right before the draft. It was coming off a year where it was just Drew Lock as the quarterback. We know Vic wasn't the biggest fan of that, so they bring in Teddy Bridgewater, have the competition between Teddy and Drew. And that year, the Broncos won 2 more games than they did the year before. They won 5 games that year, then the year before. Then under George Paton's first year, they win 7 games. Not amazing, but it's like, okay, this thing's trending in the right direction. Yep. Then George Paton decides to move on from Vic Fangio. And remember, at this point, we're still in the old ownership. So that means George Paton has the keys to this franchise, and he's pretty much running an entire franchise himself, has all the power, decides to move on from Vic, and has the interesting comment once they move on from him of Vic is one of the best coaches I've ever been around, but still fires him. Then goes into the coaching search. And that's where people's head, Henry, where your head went to, like, when did it start? That's when people think it started, because this was the offseason of Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson.
Yeah. Pure disaster.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be
a smile on your face.
That's got to be one of the worst off seasons ever for a team, right?
Well,
a coach that doesn't make it through the year, a quarterback who you give all that up for. That's tough.
In hindsight, being 2020, you look back and say, okay, the plan was probably to get Hackett and Rodgers.
Yep.
And that didn't work. So then you had to go to plan B. You were kind of already so invested in this, like, Hackett and a quarterback plan that you maybe go over aggressive for Russell Wilson. At the time, I'll be honest, I thought that was better. And it's not like Aaron Rodgers has really done anything since. But
that's true.
It just the marriage never worked. Nathaniel Hackett was too corny, as it turns out. And I mean, that in a lot of places would have been enough to get you fired expeditiously.
Yeah.
100%. And the Broncos had every, no one would have questioned if the Broncos would have moved on from George Paton after that year. Because like you said, Henry, I mean, in the moment and even looking back, that, I guess looking back more so, one of the worst off seasons that you can ever have. When you don't have an ownership, so the general manager is in charge and hires a head coach that is one of 3 head coaches in NFL history to not make it through their first full season, and then you have what turned out to be a disastrous trade for Russell Wilson. But in the moment, when the Broncos hired Nathaniel Hackett, he was the up-and-coming coach. And that just wasn't like from a local media spin. I remember there was might have even been our friend Nikki Javala, who was working with the Washington Post at that time, wrote a story about him a month before the Broncos hired him, about how he is this guy, innovative, and you should be in his meetings with how fun it is and how he has so many different ideas. And
he doesn't call plays, but don't worry about that.
Exactly. And he's saying Tugalicious, and he's winning all of the press conferences, and the vibe and the juice in the building was a 180 from what it was with Vic Fangio.
For sure.
And it seemed like at that point, you just fired Vic, so you want something different. And he was very different So the vibes there were great. And then, Ryan, I remember, I'll never forget, you and I doing the emergency press conference when the Broncos traded for Russell Wilson in the first week of March.
Yep.
And one of the things that you said, which was spot on in the moment, you said, build the George Paton statue right now. In the moment.
Why would you do that to me?
That looked great. A year and two later, looked terrible. Now, it might be coming around. And so we'll continue down this path. But like,
I saw the vision.
You saw the long-term vision. But I mean, at that moment, you were right. At that moment, it was like, this guy's won 2 games more than the previous season and his first season. And now just 14 months on the job, he's got this new up-and-coming head coach, went through 14 candidates to hire Nathaniel Hackett, and then he lands a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it all looked really good.
Yeah.
I think 99% of people were really excited about it.
Yep. 100%.
Yep.
100, right? Like who?
No, I remember there's some people out there who will remind you once in a while that they were on the other side.
Yeah, but it is the thing that pretty much anybody would have done. I mean, maybe not Hackett. You have Kevin O'Connell out there. You have Mike McDaniel out there. There's some of those guys who, I think Kevin O'Connell in particular, even at the time, maybe there was good reason to choose him instead.
Kevin O'Connell was Zach's guy. Mike McDaniel was my guy.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. But then the Russ thing, it's a terrible move. It's one of the worst moves ever made by a general manager. Like there's a short list of like who was the running back who got traded back in like the 70s with the Cowboys?
Herschel Walker.
There's like the Herschel Walker trade. There's like Deshaun Watson.
Ricky Williams trade.
Yeah. But there's like that short list of worst moves ever. But at the time, it's what anybody would have done. And so you kind of have to factor that in. Was it really that bad of a decision? Because at the time, I mean, who wouldn't have done it?
It's a process results thing, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to say in hindsight the process was wrong, but the process of trying to get a Hall of Fame, future Hall of Fame quarterback, I don't know if he's upheld that at this point.
No.
At the time, a quarterback was on the track for the Hall of Fame. The process was right? The Broncos had this long-lasting quarterback problem, and it looked like he had solved it. The results couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, and so, no, I don't blame him for making the move.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was an aggressive approach to a problem that had lasted at the time for 8 years.
Yep. And to your point, Henry, I mean, like trading for Russ, probably most people would have done it. 99% of people would have done it. It's the hiring Nathaniel Hackett part. And then, now it's easy to say like, well, he hired him over Marg's at a Mexican restaurant a mile down from that's, I mean, in the time it was
that's
that's awesome.
Nathaniel Hackett shines the most.
Yes, exactly. And then you see, like you mentioned, the other coaches, that's the one to really question, and especially because there was no really ownership group, and the Broncos knew that they were going to sell the team, so they kind of wanted this to be George Paton's thing. So that's the one that would get more blame there.
Yeah, and this has always been hindsight, but like Brian said, trading for him was fine. Extending him was the mistake.
You had to.
Russ was never agreeing to be traded to Denver without the handshake agreement that they were going to get an extension done right when he got here.
Yeah, you had to do it. There was no other option. And I think on top of that, I wonder what Russell Wilson would have looked like if it wasn't Nathaniel Hackett. Because even that 1 year with Sean Payton, he was a much, much better player. He wasn't a perfect quarterback, and he wasn't what he was in Seattle. But you even wonder if he would have been even better in that year with Sean Payton if he wasn't coming off a year that just like destroyed everything he had.
Yeah. Here's why I'll push back to that. Russell Wilson, we're sitting here on March 25th, a couple weeks into free agency, and he's still looking for a team.
Yeah.
And so that's,
no great quarterback that's still a Hall of Famer. I don't think Nathaniel Hackett ruined him.
So that's where I push back a little bit on our own idea of the process was right. Like for us three, we see Russell Wilson and we're like, yeah, this is great.
Yep.
But there's a reason why the Seahawks are willing to move on from him. Is it George Paton's job to know that?
Yeah, 100%. And all the stories that came out months after the Seahawks traded him and just about former teammates not liking him. And I remember the spin that we put on it while also acknowledging him and being like, huh, That's interesting.
This is
Well,
weird.
maybe it's just because they're the defensive guys and they didn't like how he was taking the attention away from them.
Yeah.
But at that point, Ryan, to your point, the general manager should know that. They should know all of these, and maybe they knew all of that
Bo
stuff.
Callahan, right? Did his teammates go to his birthday party?
Exactly. You got to do that research, not just when you trade a guy, but when you're guaranteeing a $250 million contract with $100 million guaranteed. So yeah, there is something to that. And so that gets us to the end of that season. And let's continue this after I give a shout out to our friends over at Coors Light, because I'll tell you what, at the beginning of that season, after trading for Russell Wilson, after getting Nathaniel Hackett, I mean, George Paton's probably having some Coors Lights with the guys, feeling great. He's chilling because he knows everything is going to be great. At the end of that season, he's probably like, oh, I gotta chill after that season. That was not a good season. Let me have a Coors Light. And our friends over at Coors Light, regardless of how you want to chill, whether it's with your friends, whether it's watching some March Madness this week, whether it's outside in this weather, you're chilling. Coors Light is all about chilling. Made to chill. It was bottled, or it's brewed chilled. It's bottled chilled. The cans and bottles even turn blue when it's the right temperature to chill. And if you want Coors Light delivered straight to you, you can go to CoorsLight.com/DNVR to have it delivered to you. Choose chill this spring and choose Coors Light. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
And shout out to Volo. Whether you're trying to get in shape or meet people or just want to find something to do after work, Volo is your best option. Volo is Denver's most popular provider of adult social sports leagues, pickup games, and events. They've got all sorts of stuff all around the city, in Lodo, Rhino, Highland, City Park, Cherry Creek, South Broadway, and more. Basically, any sport you could want to play, they've got it. Pickleball and volleyball and cornhole and drinking games and all sorts of different stuff. You can go skiing with them. You can golf with them. Whole bunch of options. You can check it all out at volosports.com. And right now, if you want to sign up, you can sign up as a free agent, a small group, or a full team. All ability levels and backgrounds are welcome to join. If you use the code DNVR10, you can get $10 off any Volo Denver league. Again, just go to volosports.com to check it all out.
And one more thing really quick. Shout out to everyone that's tuning in with us in the Toyota chat. Hit us with a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. As you guys talked about yesterday, we're less than 1 month from the draft. And if you want to get in on our draft party, make sure to scan the QR code. That'll take you to our event site where we've got a draft party coming up in less than a month. Really quick, before we move on from the 2022 season, the 2021 and 2022 season also had significant personnel moves. The Broncos drafted Pat Surtain, Javonte Williams, Quinn Meinerz, Baron Browning, Jonathon Cooper in their first draft. Of course, 3 of those guys have had big-time extensions since, so that draft is an A+.
Yep.
Now. In free agency, it was a forgettable free agency, the first one that George Paton had. Ronald Darby, Mike Boone, Kyle Fuller, Shamar Stephen. Those were the 3 top name guys, so that one's forgettable. 2022, along with Russ and Hackett, they didn't have a first-round pick. Of course, this was the draft where the Broncos were going to be watching Russell Wilson highlights during the first round, as they admitted.
Kind of redeemed it, though.
They did. Nick Bonito they brought in, and the rest was forgettable. Greg Dulcich, Damari Mathis, Eni Wazarike, DTY. But Nick Bonito, with the last pick in the second round, heck of a pick right there.
I believe the Seahawks with the Broncos pick drafted Charles Cross.
Yep.
Yeah.
Would you trade Charles Cross for Nick Bonito right now?
Oh.
No.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Especially not if the Broncos, because you already have Bulls.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very impressive. In free agency, 2022 was kind of a dark year. Randy Gregory, that was the Randy Gregory move. They also went out and got Tom Compton, K'Wan Williams, Alex Singleton. That's a bright one. I think they traded a 7th-round pick for Tom Compton
He's like
from
a
the Cardinals.
backup offensive lineman.
Yeah, exactly. Who was supposed to be their starter. He was a craft brewer as well. That might be the most notable thing about Tom Compton. So Alex Singleton was a hit. They also brought Billy Turner. That wasn't a hit. And there was one other hit, DJ Jones. They brought him in from the 49ers. Obviously a big-time hit. So kind of hits or misses in there. And then you get to the end of the 2022 season, and this is as low of a point as I think it can be for any general manager in this position when New ownership is in town. New ownership that did not hire you.
Yeah.
They come in. They fire the head coach that you hired before the season was over. Like we said, it was the only third time in NFL history that's ever happened. Russell Wilson's contract already looks disastrous, and you were the one to sign off on that when you traded him and when you gave it to him in August. And then the Broncos go into a coaching search, and George Paton is not part of the committee. It's only the ownership. Guys, at that point, I just thought it was an all-out conclusion that he was going to not be here.
Surviving that is the most impressive bullet point on his resume so far.
100%.
Because in my opinion, and we'll get a little bit more into once Sean Payton got here,
Yeah.
but I guess I'm skipping steps a little bit. Like
Well, we're right at that cusp.
the fact that George Paton was able to, and I hate to say it this way because technically he's higher in the org chart, but like was able to prove to be valuable enough to Sean Payton for
Yeah.
him to want to keep him around and work with him is I think a really big feather in his cap.
Yeah. And it also makes it tough to evaluate a lot of the things since then because Sean Payton has a lot of control over all this stuff. So like you draft Bo Nix, great pick. How much of that is Sean? How much of that is George? You sign Brandon Jones last year. How much of that is Sean? How much is George? And so it's obviously impressive to survive it, and he really did have to like work, and it makes sense when you're going through that coaching search to say, if we're going to invest all this in a big-time head coach, we need to kind of give him a lot of that control, and so we kind of have to sideline the GM for this portion. But, it does make the grading different because you don't know just who was making what decisions.
Yeah, but that's how it always works in sports. Is sometimes two people working together make the best of both of them. A perfect example would be Sean Payton and Drew Brees.
Yep.
Drew Brees was not Drew Brees before he met Sean Payton. Does that mean that Drew Brees doesn't deserve credit for his accomplishments? No. They just happen to be a perfect match. And I think that's kind of what we're getting right now with George Paton and Sean Payton, which is like George Paton does a lot of the things that if I had to guess, Sean Payton doesn't love to do.
Yeah.
There's certainly a trust that exists there. But at the same time, Sean Payton is a person who knows exactly what he wants at all times.
Yeah.
And so he can go to George and say, I need X, Y, and Z. Can I see a list of the 10 players who meet that criteria or less? And then let's go over it. And then your job is to go get them.
Yep, 100%. And George Paton was such a highly viewed general manager candidate because he was viewed as like pretty much unanimously the best assistant general manager in the NFL. And an assistant general manager does have input in what happens and probably makes some picks, stands on some tables for some guys, especially later in the draft, and says, that's my guy. I want him. So he kind of had a little bit of that role. And now it's like he is just perfectly blended into that role with the Broncos. Because I'm sure there's times when Sean Payton says, no, this is my call right here. Would that surprise you guys? If Sean just takes over? No. But there's probably also times where Sean says like, man, I don't know about the fourth round guys. Like, George, you know way more than me. And George makes that. And I think it's like, it turns out what initially seemed to be like, oh my gosh, this is horrible news for George Paton. They just brought in the most powerful coach that they possibly could have brought in, and now he's bringing in all his guys from New Orleans. It's only a matter of time until he's replaced. And credit to George Paton for hanging in there and finding that perfect balance. And honestly, credit to the ownership group because they could have easily, no one would have questioned if they would have blown George Paton out after their first year there and said like, no, sorry, we're just going to start from scratch. Everyone has said, totally understand. But they saw something in George. They saw that he is a great talent evaluator, and maybe they don't want him hiring their next head coach. And I mean, they made that clear when he was not in the head coaching interview room. But they saw the value in him, and boy, did that value just match up perfectly with Sean.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy about the role of a GM, at least when they're fully empowered, is like you have to be good at a lot of things that have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
Like evaluating safeties out of Indiana has no relation towards evaluating a head coach from how they worked as a coordinator.
Or negotiating a contract.
Totally.
Just different skills.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like different things that you have to be good at. It's possible that George Paton's just like really, really good at one of them.
Yep.
And that's all they need him for.
Yep. And now they might not need him for the head coaching part. any time in his career, depending on how long Sean Payton wants to coach for.
Yeah.
So,
And I also think that, when we first talked about this early on in the Sean Payton era and he kept him around, it was just like, oh, well, he's going to have no power.
Yep.
Like, he's just a sitting duck.
Yep.
First time something goes wrong, he'll be the scapegoat. And I think if that were the case, he probably would have left at this point.
Yeah.
But I think he, seems to be enjoying this role.
yeah.
Because I don't think, that he couldn't have another job in football if he
Yeah.
was unhappy
yeah.
with the Broncos.
Yeah.
And it feels like he actually might like being able to focus on talent evaluation.
And what was even surprising too, just about their dynamic, because Ryan, everyone felt that way. Like, man, he's just a sitting duck. Then a couple months after, I think at their post-draft press conference that they had the very first year, George Paton threw a couple of shots, funny, playful shots at Sean in front of the media, and it was like, no one was expecting that. Like, wow,
Yeah.
you're that comfortable. And then clearly that was the case, because now, a couple years later, after he's been working with Sean for 2 years, it still looks like a perfect marriage right there that just no one saw coming.
Who do you think will be with the Broncos longer, Sean or George?
Well, Sean is 7
61?
years older, 61. George is 54 right now, but they both have this in their blood.
It's got to be George, right? Because it's tough to imagine Sean sticking around in a world in which they change general managers.
See, I don't see that.
Really?
I see it as Sean. Sean's going to, in my opinion, for sure, see out a certain portion of Bo Nix's career. And he's probably going to be the coach that entire time.
Yep.
I don't think this would happen, but let's just say this free agent class ends up being just a flop. Then I could see Sean Payton being like, all right, I'm going to try someone else.
Yeah.
I'd probably
It's
have to lean
tough.
Sean too.
Really?
But lean.
I'll go George.
Yeah, it's a very slight, just leaning from the middle.
Yeah.
I think Sean has another 10 years or so in him. And I think that the only way he lasts 10 years is if things are going well. Like, if things go badly, he's gone. As long as things are going well, I think George stays. I don't think he has interest in leaving. I think if things are going well, they don't make that change.
So
I'll
you're saying then
flip it.
Sean Payton retires.
Yeah.
And George
Yep.
Payton stays
And
on.
George is still there.
That is the best possible scenario.
Yeah, it's definitely bold to predict those
so
guys sticking
successful
around.
that
Yeah, because it's rare you have a coach stick around anywhere for 10 years. But it feels like
that's
things
where
are
I'm
trending
at.
that
It's just
way.
I can't even imagine
Yeah.
anything in sports lasting 10
Yeah.
years.
I think Sean's going to be here for 10 years. I think he's going to be here for Bo Nix's career.
I would take the under on that so heavily.
But you look at Sean, and as much as it was like he's intimidating coming in because he's bringing all of his guys from New Orleans, that also shows he is so loyal, and maybe to a fault, but you look, he had the same general manager his entire tenure in New Orleans with Mickey Loomis. They became best friends, and you could say, I think, that George and Sean are becoming best friends, whether it's just inside the building or outside. But it seems like they're becoming that Mickey and Mickey and Sean connection that Sean had for 15 years in New Orleans. So, and they did go 7-9 for 3 straight years in New Orleans when they had Drew Brees, and they didn't make a change as either head coach or general manager there. So maybe if it's not too bad, now as Sean will remind you, the next time he wins fewer than 7 games will be the first time in his career. So maybe if things get really bad, like a 5-win season, especially when Sean thinks he has the quarterback, then that's when they make a change. But I think Sean's actually a very loyal guy.
So you think when Sean retired the first time, it was a fake retirement?
Total guessing right now. I think it was. This is a pretty bad situation.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it was just I'm gonna have to get out of here before the bomb goes off.
I think, I don't know what I'd call fake. I think it was like he knew he was done as the Saints head coach. Like, and in that way, it's a real retirement. Like, this was been my career as being the Saints head coach. I'm going to retire, and then whatever happens from there happens. Whether it's coaching, whether it's media, whatever. But I don't think he was like sitting there thinking like, okay, I'm going to retire here, and in 2 years I'm going to be back coaching.
My point on this is just you don't retire and then be like, actually, I think I want to work 13 more years.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. That's why I don't think it was a true retirement.
And so I kind of got the feeling that he was maybe like, yeah, maybe I am done with this. And then, he did the Fox thing and he was like, oh man, I really do love this game. I still have more to give it. And I think I have more to prove because people, have given a lot of my credit to Drew Brees, etc. And he was like, I'm going to go back and show that I can do this again in a totally different place. But I always imagined him doing it like just to the point where he was proven right. Like, it was me. Look, I did it with Drew Brees. I'm doing it with Bo Nix.
Yeah.
And maybe that has to be a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I don't know if it, I'm sure in his mind it would. Yeah. But then it's like, okay, well, if he won the Super Bowl, he's not just going to be like, all right, see you guys. Like,
right.
He's like, I think I could win 3 with Bo or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's tough. I always envisioned like 5 years max when he was hired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd definitely take the over.
If I said I'll give you $100 if you get the number right, how many more years would you say he coaches?
5 more years.
5 more from here?
Yeah.
So 7 total. I go
Which
10.
is over my original feeling, but I'm like, he'll go to the end of the Bo Nix rookie deal.
Yeah, unless it's kind of easing into that next one.
And then
hopefully.
maybe 1 year into the next deal.
Here, I'm going to go 10. I'm going to say 71 years old. There's, 3 other coaches in the AFC West that are in their 70s right now still coaching.
3 other in the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And they're
all
all
of
in the
them.
division. And I'll say it's going to look similar to Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, where it's like, well, maybe the job, if Bo Nix does become not that good, but like really, really good, well, why would Sean step away? It's not that. It's still taxing, but like he doesn't have to go look for a quarterback every single year. So it's kind of easy. He's just gonna roll. And even though like I feel like 3 years ago people brought up like, is Andy Reid done? And he just keeps doing it because he has Patrick Mahomes. It's kind of easy now and fun. He's guaranteed 12 wins. He's guaranteed to make the playoffs.
Just like has to come up with fun plays.
Exactly. So that's why I'll say that it's longer than that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just, unless you're in that very tippy top tier where it's like, yeah, it's coin toss. We're just going to be in the Super Bowl again this year. The dynamics change a little because like there's Andy Reid's the only coach in the NFL who gets the luxury of like, yeah, this is going to be a pretty actually easy job for me.
Yeah.
So even if it does feel like you're automatic playoffs every year, you're competing with the Chiefs for the division every year, it is still more challenging and it would be easier to retire from that, I think. It's tough.
I could see Sean though, like the Broncos win the Super Bowl this year, and then him just being like, "Told you so." See ya.
And walking away from $20 million a year.
And that's the other piece.
Who needs more $20 million years?
I wonder what he made on average with the Saints.
It's a good question.
Probably 5. Because you have to remember, it starts in 2006.
Yeah, maybe even less than that on average.
Yeah, on average.
But
And then TV money, he got probably 5 for that.
at least.
Yeah.
And also think if he wins a Super Bowl, he's probably in a smart way going up to ownership who can pay whatever the heck they want to and say, okay, come on, how about another 5? How about another 10 per year? Let's redo this deal right now.
I mean, he's got to be like near $100 million in career earnings.
But he can double that if he gets another 4-year, $100
I know,
million
but, like,
contract.
At almost 70 years old. I don't know.
Yep. Okay, so let's continue
Personally,
this.
I just want to play golf.
That's very fair. Well, and he would like to do that too, I'm sure. Let's continue the good side of this conversation. Look at the past couple years because I think it's pretty much only been good after. I give a shout out to our friends over at Raising Cane's. Where Raising Cane's, you can make a craveable box combo with dreams that come true over at Raising Cane's, where every chicken finger is hand battered and cooked to order. They've got crinkle cut fries that come from grade A premium potatoes. They have thick sliced Texas toast, which is lightly buttered with that Cane's garlic butter blend and grilled on the grill to golden brown perfection. They've got the creamy, delicious coleslaw, and of course, Cane's sauce, which is made in the restaurant every single day. And you can get that all with the full box combo, which is a special that they've got going on. And you can get it by checking out a Raising Cane's near you. Get your box combo today and make your craveable dreams a reality. Raising Cane's chicken fingers, one love.
Also, shout out to our friends over at Bet365. I will say, our March Madness strategy this year, bad.
Oh, no.
Bet365 being a part of it, good. And that's
Yes.
because of the early payouts
Yes.
that you can get, which they lowered down to 15 points for this tournament.
Wow.
And we actually, just on Sunday night, had our first one where we won a game that we lost.
Yep.
Oregon takes a 15-point lead early in the game on Arizona. They were the dogs. We won the bet.
Yep.
We won the bet like 3 minutes into the game.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Then you just watch the rest of the game stress-free.
Yep.
Or you put it back on. I did not, but in the past I have before.
You doubled it.
Flip
Yeah.
it to Arizona. Like take the underdog.
Usually I just stick with the, like, if the payout, let's just say $100 to make the math easy, then at that point they might be like,
Minus 350.
yeah, exactly. So you put it on there, it's like instead of the $100 payout, it's like a $1,300 payout.
No.
No.
1250.
Wait, you're saying you're
130.
flipping it onto the other
Yeah.
team then?
Oh, yeah. No. I'm sorry. I was thinking 1,000 in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, 130.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, don't do
Telling
that.
you, another
then.
slight flex from Hank.
Yeah.
Thinking in $1,000 units.
No. That'd be someday.
Anyways,
Someday.
you can get in on that and many other great deals when you go over to Bet365, including $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 whether you win or lose. Sign up using the code DNVR365. Deposit $10 and place a bet of $5 or more to get $150 in bonus bet as soon as that bet settles, win or lose. Of course, you must be 21 and older and physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER.
So, getting back to George's time, one of the moves that George Paton did in order to get Sean Payton, it wasn't in order to get Sean Payton, but it helped get Sean Payton, was they traded essentially Bradley Chubb for Sean Payton because they traded a first-round pick, or they traded Bradley Chubb to the Dolphins, got a first-round pick then they used that first-round pick that next offseason to get Sean Payton. Would you guys trade Sean Payton for Bradley Chubb right now?
I mean, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And so hindsight now, it's like, that's a great deal. It's great because he also would have had to pay Bradley Chubb. The Dolphins
Totally
gave him
forgot
the
that
deal.
we had to trade for Sean Payton.
Exactly. Yeah, they had to give him $23 million, or the Dolphins gave Bradley Chubb a $23 million per year deal.
Same with the Broncos and Sean Payton.
Exactly. And one hurts the salary cap, one doesn't. So that was a great move from George. And that's when things really started to get better for him, because you start right after the Broncos get Sean Payton. They go out and still don't have a first round pick because they had to trade that for Sean Payton. And they didn't have it from Russell Wilson's trade still. They go out and get Marvin Mims in the second round, Drew Sanders in the third, Riley Moss in the third round. Okay, for not having a first round pick.
Two starters.
Yeah. Not a bad draft, and it could be a great draft. I mean, the way Marvin Mims ended the season last year, it could really be good, and if Riley Moss steps up into that corner too, then it's a great draft. But then in free agency, Sean Payton's first free agency here, they go out and get Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, and Zach Allen.
Biggest group of big.
Yeah, that's exact. Plus, then an all-pro on the defensive line right there. Pretty darn good free agency there, and I think Broncos country was actually a little more guarded to those moves, since we had seen offensive linemen be signed pretty much every single season since like 2013. And it's these here for 1 year, out the next year. Not the case with McGlinchey, Powers, and of course Zach Allen, where they all look like absolute hits.
Yeah. And I mean, even when you hired Sean Payton and all the things that you did, it was just like, okay, if anyone can fix Russ, it's him. And if not, you still, you go down the next road. You'd rather have Sean Payton than most anyone else you could have. Whether that's developing a rookie like he did or, bringing in the next free agent.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then so that year goes, and the Broncos almost get a winning record, 8-9 that season. It's like, okay, great job, Sean. Where do things stand with George? Even a year ago, it was like, where do things stand? Last offseason, George and Sean go out and have another great draft class, and of course, including Bo Nix. And Henry said, like, who gets credit for that? I think Sean's going to take credit for that, but obviously George had to have signed off in some extent, so I think we should give credit to George to some extent for getting Bo Nix. No? You're questioning that?
I don't think he had to sign off on anything. I think that in the positive George Paton version of this, he assisted in the evaluation of Bo Nix that led to Sean Payton saying, that's my guy.
That's fair. And yeah, he was part of the evaluation of taking him. But then free agency, and I think this is where this might be George Payton's best work, is with a $55 million dead cap hit with Russell Wilson, $80 million in dead cap. George Paton has no money, but is told from ownership, you got to still win right now, and is clearly feeling the pressure of like, okay, I've done it 1 year with Sean and it worked, but I got to prove it more than that. and he goes out with no money and gets Malcolm Roach, Brandon Jones, and then some other pieces, like a Cody Barton, who probably outplayed his contract there. I'm happy
why
the
he got a
Broncos
new one
didn't
that's
sign.
bigger.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm happy they didn't sign him to that one, but clearly a good deal. But Malcolm Roach, Brandon Jones, and they brought in some pieces that ended up being big contributors for this team with just no money. So that might have been his most impressive moment, because I don't know how much of that was Sean. I think a lot of that was George and doing really, really big time analysis.
I think it's at least half Sean, though. And I know there's still the scouting and all that, but it really, I feel like in general, I feel like I've kind of come to the decision that when somebody makes a move for the Broncos, more often than not, Sean's kind of the guy that it runs through. But yeah, I mean, it's great stuff, and the evaluations and all that, he is a big part of it. Man, you can't really complain about free agency ever since like the Randy Gregory stuff.
Yeah, I think it definitely does run through Sean.
Yeah.
George isn't signing guys without running things through Sean. I mean, that's just how every team works. But Brandon Jones was a guy that played like 45% of the defensive snaps for the Dolphins the year before they signed him. He wasn't necessarily like a top free agent where it's like so obvious and Sean's just like, we got to go get this guy. I do think that those guys, and Malcolm Roach, Sean's admitted that like Malcolm Roach was not this guy when he was in New Orleans. So while there's that New Orleans connection, I still think it's like, man, that is just, it was really good evaluation, which I'm sure Sean's very capable of course.
Yeah.
But I think it's George definitely being the part of the process, especially for last year's class.
I think it's teamwork.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if Sean Payton was like, go get me Brandon Jones. You know? He might say like, go get me a safety that meets this criteria.
Yeah.
But I'd
And-
imagine he's at least like in the room with everybody, like watching and doing that stuff, you know?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
But I think that George is oftentimes the one bringing these guys to the table. It's like, okay, here's an option.
Yeah.
He does X, Y, and Z well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so now we sit here, and Broncos have had another free agency. They're preparing for the draft. What's George Paton's future with this team right now? Because the first 2 years, it was about as dark as it could be. The last 2 years, as encouraging almost as it could be.
I mean, we kind of just talked about it, right? Like, feels like him and Sean are going to ride this thing out together. There's some ways that things could go awry, but, you know, in general, everyone's feeling really positive about the direction of this franchise right now. As long as that direction keeps moving that way, George Paton's going to be here a very long time.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a universe where something horrible happens and they only win 6 games this year. And I think even in that case, I don't think they're moving on from George. I think there's enough of a track record to say like, this is working. We've hit on enough picks. So I just don't see anything changing unless things go pretty disastrously bad.
Yeah, and I think that, like you guys said, I think he's here for the long haul. And so when it comes to like, is it time for him to get an extension? When the Broncos signed George 4 years ago, he signed a 6-year deal. That just also shows how valued he was by NFL teams, as he could demand a 6-year deal, which is crazy. Like, there's head coaches that get 3-year deals. George Paton got a 6-year deal with the Broncos, so he's entering his 5th season now. And so there's no rush to get him a contract extension right now. In a year from now, that's when you'll get it done. Either because he's not going to go into that final year of his deal just without a deal, I don't expect. So
Yeah.
I think in a year from now, if the Broncos are anywhere close to where they've been trending right now, George Paton is going to get an extension, maybe even another 6-year extension, a big-time extension. Maybe that's when Sean gets one as well after being here for 3 years. They give him that $5 million bump as well. And George Paton could get a really good contract. I wouldn't, if the Broncos extended George Paton right now, I wouldn't be upset. I just don't think they will. I think they'll probably wait a year to do that. So you guys agree that pretty much he's going to get an extension at some point in the next year?
And there's just no reason really to do it now. Like if the Broncos were the Jaguars, then it would make sense to do it now, because you could see George just like leaving to somewhere where, you know, they're willing to invest more in the team, or where they're willing to pay him more. But the Broncos are where they are, and the ownership group willing to pay what they're willing to pay. Like there's just no reason to think you can't get the deal done. Again, like if George says, I'd like to do this now, no reason not to do it now either. But it'll come at some point in the next probably like 15 months before next season starts.
Is there any world where a new GM job opens up that has a lot more power that George Paton is an attractive candidate for and he takes?
Would he want to? Because he had that opportunity here the first 2 years with the Broncos, and we just detailed how that went.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. I mean, he's kind of like getting a GM salary to do a scout's job.
Yeah, like an assistant GM's job.
Yeah.
And he's only going to continue to look better and better.
Like head of scouting, maybe.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
The thing is, he has time though, and like he has enough of a track record that like if he were to get fired for some reason, he would get the opportunity to be a GM somewhere else. It's not like he would probably be downgraded to assistant GM at the next stop and work his way back. That's why knowing that he, if things go well, will outlast Sean just for age reasons. He knows that that's going to come here, and if things go wrong here, then he'll have the opportunity to leave if he really wants to. But I would be surprised if that's something he's concerned about.
I would think so too. We heard during the hiring process about how his family and his wife's family is from Southern California. Maybe if a Rams job opened up and you work with Sean McVay, but it seems like Sean McVay might be retired before Sean Payton is retired. But I don't think so. I think this is a great spot for Sean to be in right now. A really good spot.
Angel brought up the early extensions for Meinerz and Pat. I guess Sutton in there too, but those are two big ones where you get those done early instead of paying now where it would cost so much more. That's also him. That's one thing that like I'm sure Sean has to sign off, but those negotiations are kind of George's responsibility, you know?
Well, and one more thing, he traded Vaughn away. In his very first year as general manager, he traded Von Miller for a second and a third round pick, which turned into Nick Bonito. So that whole process played out pretty well.
Who's the third?
I don't know if it was Dulcich.
I think it was.
But it might have been might have been Dulcich there.
Was Dulcich.
But hey, you hit on one of them. And I think that, Ryan, you talked about this earlier. Credit to George for sticking through. Credit for Sean for seeing, Sean and ownership group for seeing what made George Paton such an attractive candidate. Because they could have fired him easily 2 years ago, but they stuck with him. And credit to George for sticking with it, because now he's a really good general manager in the NFL right now, and who knows where the Broncos will be without him, and what the free agencies and the drafts would look like. So it's really one of the most impressive redemption stories and turnarounds that we've seen in Colorado sports, honestly.
And I think Sean Payton actually deserves quite a bit of credit too, because we talk about him a lot as this very stubborn figure, which I think he is. But I think he had an open mind about this. He very easily could have been like, why in the world would I want this guy on my staff? I have plenty of people that I already know and like and trust.
Yeah.
But he said, I'll give it a chance.
Yep.
And that, I think it was a mature move by Sean.
Yeah, totally agree. And Henry, you've looked at the other GMs that were hired in that cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, because sometimes it's hard just to think about like, is one guy doing a good job without knowing what others are doing. He was one of the 7 GMs hired in 2021. Wow. The 1 in 15 Jaguars hired Trent Baalke, who first move hired Urban Meyer. Obviously didn't go well.
Wow, possibly, not even possibly.
No.
Definitely worse than hiring Nathaniel Hackett.
No, it's pretty crazy. First pick was Trevor Lawrence, which is probably why it was kind of seen as a good job at the time. Eventually wound up with Doug Peterson. They have a couple 9-8 seasons. One playoff appearance last year. They were 4-13, and he got fired.
Yep.
Oh,
and
Trent
now they have like a
Baalke.
13-year-old in there.
Yeah, they really do. It's crazy.
yeah.
The guy looks younger than I do, and Trent Baalke, a disaster.
Yep.
An absolute disaster. Like, he blew up everything in the 49ers. People were surprised that the Jaguars hired him.
I was going to say, he wasn't even like considered a good hire ever.
No, never. And then this year, he was such a bad GM, and the whole league has known about it for so long that they tried to hire a head coach with him being the general manager, and every head coach said, no, we don't want that job.
Yeah.
And then they had to fire Trent Baalke in order to hire
Liam Cohen.
Duval.
Yeah. 7-9 Washington, the football team at the time. They went with Martin Mayhew, who inherited Ron Rivera and kept him the entire time he was there. Let's see. Before he got there, it was Alex Smith, but in his first year, he moved on to Taylor Heineke. Then Heineke split time with Wentz, and then Sam Howell got a year as a starter.
Yikes.
16-31-1 in 3 years, and then he got fired. But he gets fired right before they get Jaden Daniels. He'd built like that awesome defensive line. Like they had some of those pieces there, and I kind of wonder if he just would have taken Jaden Daniels if he'd lasted another year, and all of a sudden he'd be getting some of this success. At the same time, he would have had to hire Dan Quinn and all that, but maybe got unlucky with the timing, but obviously didn't do well.
No, not at all.
4-12 Falcons took Terry Fontenot. His first year was Matt Ryan's last year.
And I want to say Fontenot was the runner-up for the Broncos job.
Yep, he
Is
was.
that right?
Yep.
Okay. So his first year was Matt Ryan's last year. Then he had Mariota splitting time with Ritter. Then it was Ritter. All those seasons won 7 games. Last year, they finally win 8 games. First-round picks were Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan, and now Michael Penix. Obviously, weird stuff with Penix and Kirk Cousins. Obviously, in this tier, though, that is below what George Paton has done.
So he gave him that
But
Kirk
he's still
Cousins
alive.
contract.
Still there.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, not ideal.
Yep,
But he
still
survived
around.
that.
Yeah, he's still there. And again, like I could see this all working out for him in the long run. As of now, though, you absolutely go with George
Penix
Payton.
is a hit. None of the rest of it really matters.
Exactly.
Nope.
And then you get
Just like
Bijan
Bo.
and Drake London. This is the last one who's pretty clearly behind George Paton, and that is Scott Fitterer, who joined the 5-11 Panthers. He decided to bring in Sam Darnold and Cam Newton to be his quarterbacks. His first draft pick was J.C. Horn, with obviously Pat Surtain still on the board. He made the
Who's making more than Pat Surtain right now?
Yeah,
He
no,
is.
bad moves there. He traded Christian McCaffrey and Brian Burns. I think this is kind of fun because the two guys who are right there with George also made big trades. So in exchange for those two, they got Jonathan Brooks, Chow Smith-Wade, DJ Johnson, and a second-round pick that was part of the massive trade that included a bunch of other stuff to go get Bryce Young.
Yikes.
Yeah. So you would much rather have Brian Burns and Christian McCaffrey than that list of random guys. And then gets fired a year ago. The two good GMs. Brad Holmes went to the 5-11 Lions, hired Dan Campbell, immediately traded Matt Stafford for Jared Goff. Also got picks that turned into Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jamison Williams.
Oh, my God.
Obviously, things have gone well there.
Very good.
And I think that's probably the one where you say, yep, he's done better than George Payton, but that's obviously a high bar to clear.
I mean, he hit like a 6-leg parlay.
Exactly.
Yes, he did.
Exactly.
Just his first, he just sat down on the sportsbook,
Yep.
picked 6 teams, they all won, and he walked
Yep.
out rich.
And this wasn't like minus 300 parlays.
No,
this was
no.
like
No.
plus 4.
Trade the all-time best quarterback in
We've
the
ever had.
franchise's
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
Stafford for Goff, Laporta, Gibbs, and Jamison Williams.
And then also Dan Campbell. Remember, Dan Campbell was being trolled across the country for biting the kneecaps off, and people were
Yep.
like, "Oh my gosh, this isn't going to play." And look, he's one of the best head coaches in the NFL.
And this is the tough one to me, whether you take Nick Caserio or George Payton for better so far. So when Nick Caserio took over the Texans the year before, they were 4-12, trades away Deshaun Watson, gets picks that turn into Will Anderson, Tank Dell, Kenyon Green, Kalen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter, John Mechie, Christian Harris, Damian Pierce, Jamal Hill, Cade Stover, and a second-round pick that they have this
10
year.
picks?
So they split some of those.
Oh,
They
okay.
traded down with some of them.
And then you also don't have to pay Deshaun Watson
And then you don't have to pay Deshaun
Or
Watson.
deal with any
Yeah,
of that.
obviously you just go get C.J. Stroud, which is great. Daniil Hunter, who's been great. Stephon Diggs sucked. Hired D'Amico Ryans. That's the one with George Payton where I think you probably have to go with the Texans, even if it's
Only
just because they've kind of got to
They've
this.
won in the playoffs.
They've won in the playoffs, and the team he took over was one win worse.
Yeah.
But it's right there.
And the Texans have historically been a pretty disastrous franchise, and the Broncos have obviously been one of the best.
And same with the Lions.
Yes.
Two really bad franchises, so it's okay to maybe
Yep.
give those guys a little bit of a nod.
So 4 guys behind George, 2 guys probably in front.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, it's all on Bo Nix, right? Just like it's all going to be on Jared Goff and it's all going to be on C.J. Stroud to elevate those guys and show that they're worth it. But if Bo Nix hits, then what we talked about, well, Sean's just going to hang around because his job's a lot easier than it could be than having to go into the quarterback market every single year. And same with George Paton. When you don't have to get a quarterback, how much easier does that make George Paton's life right now?
I mean, exponentially.
If he's
Way more
just
fun.
surrounding Bo with weapons and how to protect him in a good defense instead of trying to find the quarterback where there's only 10 really good ones in the world right now.
Yeah.
Like if Bo turns into that guy, then yeah, this is going to be a major hit, and George Paton's going to look great. Sean Payton's definitely a Hall of Fame coach. Maybe George Paton's a Hall of Fame GM. It's crazy. No pressure, Bo.
I mean, yeah, you're going to have to win multiple Super Bowls.
Yep. But what's your expectation for the Bo Nix era?
Expectation is always a tough word because I see it as what do you expect? What do you expect to happen? And again, like there's 32 teams. You should win a Super Bowl one in every 32 years. Bo Nix plays 16, say half. You would say like, yeah, it should be 50-50. They get a Super Bowl. And then from there, it's how much better or below average is he? So if he's better than average, then maybe it goes from 50-50 to 75% chance they get one.
Okay, you're the Walton Payton or Walter Penner ownership. Walton Penner ownership group. What are your expectations? So not eliminate the math. Put like the human perspective in it. What are
They
your?
don't sound like the kind of people that eliminate the math.
It's a
I
Super
think
Bowl.
I definitely think they're people that expect the most. Now, obviously, I don't think 10 straight Super Bowls. I know they're realistic in that sense, but I don't think they sit here and do the math like you did, Henry, which is fair why you did that. But I don't think they say like, in the next 16 years, let's maybe win one Super Bowl. I don't think that's their expectation.
But it just depends. To me, expectations are what you expect. But if you go with like, what should the goal be or what should the standard be? What are you trying to do here? Then yes, it's absolutely like it's multiple Super Bowls.
My expectation would be one Super Bowl. Anything above that would be gravy, in my opinion. Like, just thinking about the history of the NFL and the quarterbacks who have won multiple Super Bowls as a starter, I think it's asking quite a bit.
Yeah.
To say like the expectation should be 2 Super Bowls. To me, if you get a Super Bowl, that's you did everything right. You got Sean Payton, you brought in Bo Nix, you made the right draft picks. Like that all leads to winning a Super Bowl. That means that you did it right. After that, of course, then it kind of resets, and you're saying like, well, it's like Jokic and McKinnon, right? You're like, could we potentially only get one out of these guys? Like, it sounds crazy at the time, but then again, go back and look at the quarterbacks who have won 2 Super Bowls, and you're talking about the best quarterbacks in the history of the game.
Yeah, but with Sean Payton, you're talking about one of the best coaches in the history of the game as well, especially when it comes to the offensive performance that he has. I think that's what they're saying. And I do think that they believe Sean's here for the next 10, maybe even 15 years. And so I think they view the window with Bo as the window with Sean right now. And they're not paying Sean Payton $20 million to make the playoffs. They're paying Sean Payton $20 million, which could be $30 million per year in a couple of years, to win multiple Super Bowls. So I think that's the hope. I think that's the expectation. Multiple. But it's a longer window that I think than you think.
Yeah,
so
for
maybe
sure.
those two do add up if you think he's going to coach for 7 total years, and I think 15.
Yeah, definitely.
Man, 2 years ago, we're not having these conversations.
Oh wait, no, that was after Russ. I was thinking before Russ.
Yeah, before Russ.
When
the
Russ got
Broncos
here, we had those
plan
conversations.
At quarterback. Like, what were we talking about? The Broncos plan at quarterback a week before they traded for Russ.
Russ and Aaron Rodgers.
No, we were talking about Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett.
Oh my goodness, that was that draft.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yep.
Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a thank goodness.
We're happy with where we are.
It all led to Bo Nix and Sean Payton. Man,
Minor setback, major comeback.
exactly. What a path we just took.
That was a good little trip down memory lane.
It really, really was. And we are, 30 days away from the draft, 29 days away from the draft coming up. Make sure you are locked and loaded with us. Maybe we'll be talking to our draft expert, Fran Duffy, later this week. Second wave of free agency, we're going to be following any moves, and so we are going to be doing that every single day here on the DNVR Broncos podcast, 11 a.m. Hit us with a thumbs up on our way out. We really appreciate everyone rocking and rolling with us. We got a lot of people that are in here every day. John, Jess, Quentin, Edward, TB007, Daniel, Jose, David, so many of you in here, and we really appreciate every single one of you. Strez, of course, thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow, 11 a.m. on the DNVR Broncos podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.